What is up, guys, and welcome back. Today we are going to be talking all about the French early game. This video isn't going to be as long because they don't have as much going on, but there are some things that I want to point out in France to talk about. I'm not going to give you guys like a picture-perfect strategy here. This one's going to be a little bit more loose because I want to see what kind of creative things that you guys come up with in your defenses of France. So in this video, instead of a concrete strategy, I'm just going to give you things that I look out for when setting up my defense of France, and just some things to keep an eye on so that the Germans don't try to pull a quick one on you. And then I'm also going to talk about how I like to handle the Navy here at the end as well. All right, let's go. Okay, let's talk about the most important decision you're going to make in Global War 1936, French Tech. That was a joke. It really doesn't matter that much because you're probably not going to get too much of it, and if you do, it's going to be right there at the very end. But let's talk about it. What should you do as France? I think a pretty obvious answer. You only have one factory. Just go with wartime economy. And if you get it up to stage 2 before you can get on past, then I usually go with advanced mechs next. Just because the odds of you getting this are very, very low. But as I've mentioned many times, advanced mechs are one of my favorite units in the game, and they're going to be great for the French if you can get to them, if you happen to retake Paris. And if on some weird occasion you get past advanced mechs as well, at that point, you really just throw a dart at the board and pick one. I'm going to go with long-range aircraft because I like it. Other than that, it doesn't. The odds of you getting out here, not likely. Okay, let's move on to how we're going to play the early game for France. Okay, so when talking about France here in the early game, it's pretty obvious that your goal is going to be to die as nobly as possible, hurt the Germans as bad as you can on your way out the door. And there are a couple different ways that you can try to go about this. The first one being just put every unit possible into mainland France and really give the Germans a hard time on the way through. So, bring this Foreign Legion up from Algeria. You can upgrade this militia out here into an infantry and bring him back into mainland France. A lot of new players forget that there is something called strategic naval movement, which allows you to bring this guy all the way over into mainland France in 2 turns, so it does not take that long to get him over there back into Europe. And so those are going to be the only 3 external guys you can get into France. And then obviously all disposable income goes into units that immediately go into Paris. You can also go the route of trying to win the Abyssinian War down here against Italy. It's tough, but it's not impossible. There are a lot of videos out there on how you can try to win this guy. So you start with 2 militia there for Abyssinia, which obviously isn't going to get it done against the fighter and 4 ground troops, but you can, plead your case to the Russians and maybe get them they can lend-lease an infantry through this minor port here, nothing more than that infantry, but they can get an infantry in there, which may delay the Italians, and if you hit your recruitment roll, then you're lucky, but if you hit the recruitment roll, then it's going to be really tough for the Italians to take that. And also the French can lend-lease an infantry down there. So even if you don't hit your recruitment roll, you can have 2 militia and 2 infantry in there if you get the Russians to play ball. And then obviously if Abyssinia is still alive when France falls, then Abyssinia goes free French. And so all units in Abyssinia would go free French. So what you can do is you can stockpile a bunch of dudes down here and then just immediately crush Vichy right after. And then if the Italians try anything, you can really help out in Africa. The problem I see with this particular strategy is once you've got all these dudes down here, first off, if you have dudes down here, you didn't hurt the Germans very bad in France, which means they're probably doing really well in Europe. And I think the trade-off to that would be that eventually the French are going to come back really strong because they saved all these dudes in Abyssinia. But the problem is, how do you get them back across the Med? You've got to build transports or get transports from the U.S. And it's just logistically difficult and it's kind of slow. If Vichy knows they're going to get crushed in Africa, then they're just going to turtle there in southern France and get some Lend-Lease from the Germans, probably 1 infantry per turn. And then in no time, that southern France is pretty beefy, and it's going to be tough for you to get across unless you want to go through Yugoslavia or something. But so you can't take the Abyssinia route. And then, of course, your third option is just spread your troops all across your territories and hope you get some rolls. It's 50-50. If you're feeling lucky, you can try that and take the Vichy out pretty early as well. But I think the typical strategy is going to be to just put as much as you can in France to hurt the Germans as badly as possible on their way in. And so now let's talk about how your defense here is going to look. Again, there are a couple ways you can do it. So I'm going to run through a couple thoughts to go through my head here. The first being is, how are the Germans setting up? Where does it look like they're going to try to come in from? I think the most common entrance is going to be Belgium into Picardy, and then either straight on to Paris or a second round of blitzing to get around. Don't forget the Germans have 2 rounds of attack moves against you that you have to plan for. So they can come into Belgium, blitz into Picardy, and then blitz around Paris on both sides and surround Paris that way. Another thing they can do is just try to tank it across the Maginot Line and then straight into Paris, which they may do if you leave Alsace-Lorraine under-defended. As the German player, I'm always looking out for that. If the French player thinks that they're safe behind the Maginot Line, then I may try to capitalize on that, but it's not going to happen very often. Also, in my last game, I went through Switzerland and then around and caught them by surprise. So be aware that just like they can go through Belgium, blitz into Picardy, and then blitz around on the second impulse, you can come through Switzerland and then on your second impulse, surround Paris. So you've got a lot of stuff to worry about. There are 2 ways you can die. And so a good strategy is to just load up on this front line and try to take as many casualties as you can and then let them kind of waltz into Paris once they get through. But also, they start with this transport plane, so you do have to watch out for airborne troops dropping in here into Aquitaine or in undefended Paris and just completely missing out on all the fighting. So in general, what I usually do and what a pretty basic setup is 3 or 4 guys in Paris, the rest here in Picardy and Alsace-Lorraine, and then 1 or 2 guys in Aquitaine to try to defend against an airborne assault that could come back there to try to surround France. So that's just a basic setup. Another thing you can do is, since you know that you're pretty much going to die, you can just try to make it as expensive as possible for the Germans. So what I've done in the past is just buy a bunch of anti-aircraft guns and a bunch of tank destroyers and just try to take out all of the really, really expensive German units on the way through their planes and their tanks, which is going to make it a lot more difficult for the Germans to recover and get into Russia quickly. And that actually worked pretty well for me. It lessens your odds of overall survival, but it can, if you get lucky, it can certainly make it way more expensive than it normally would be for the Germans. So there's another idea for you. One thing to think about, remember that on your Maginot Line here, your ground units are going to get +3 on the first round of attack. So if you only have militia in there, they're going to be defending at a 5 on that first round, which is the most important round. It's when the most casualties are usually going to happen. So militia are cheaper than your infantry, and they're going to defend really, really well there in Alsace-Lorraine. But again, be wary of the Germans coming through Switzerland and picking off those now weak militia, because they're going to be defending it at 2 if he's coming through Switzerland. Generally don't have to worry about Normandy or southern France there. You can usually leave them empty. I don't imagine the Italians are going to declare war to help the Germans out. They usually don't need it. So no real reason to defend southern France there. Aquitaine back here is a good candidate to try to stop the surrounding. So whether it be 1 infantry back here or 2 or 3, sometimes if they don't get a good blitz off, like if they get diced and they don't finish you off in 2 rounds, then having those 3 infantry back there can be a lifesaver because it'll save you from getting surrounded, whether by airborne assaults or if you hit him hard in his first round and he doesn't have much left to blitz into Aquitaine, and you've got 3 infantry there, then he may not be able to get it done on that first round. And as France, if it takes 2 turns for the Germans to kill you, that's a big deal. That's a lot of time that you're making those Germans take, and probably a lot more troops because you've got another round of buys going down. That's more infantry, that's more units for them to take out. So I like to have, a couple infantry back here in Aquitaine to try to plan for that possible eventuality. I've seen people put fortifications inside of Paris. We saw Fortress Drinks put a fortification right here in between Picardy and Alsace-Lorraine to try to stop the blitz going around and surrounding Paris. But fortifications are expensive. It's a judgment call. It's however you want to play it. There are a lot of different ways to do it. And always remember this fighter here. This is going to be your little wild card. He can defend any territory you want him to because of this air base. So you want to use him in the highest percentage battle that you have, right? So if you've got an airborne troop coming back here to try to take out 1 infantry, then scramble your fighter back here and maybe you can pick him off before he hits you. Don't forget your terrain modifiers, which are easy to do. You've got a river here defending Normandy and Paris. Whatever you can do to try to weasel your way out of dying on that first round is what you're gonna, usually want to do. All right, let's talk about some Navy real quick. The rolls aren't great when you're rolling for the Vichy versus Free French Navy. You've got a 25% chance to get each ship. The Vichy has a 25% chance to get each ship, and then it either goes scuttled or German beyond that. The way I like to play it is, if you think about it, this is one of the only times in the game that the Allies get to strike at the Axis before the Axis have a chance to respond. And what I mean is, since all this happens during the Germans' combat phase, the Vichy French aren't going to have an opportunity to attack the Free French before the Free French take their turn. So the Free French are probably going to get the first shot off, and for that reason, I like to leave the French Navy in this sea zone so the Vichy can't get away, just in case, because it's going to be about 50-50 who has the bigger navy. The Vichy French are going to get a chance to non-combat their ships, and you don't want them to be able to run away. If they have the smaller navy, you want to take them out as quickly as possible, because it seems to me that whoever wins the naval fight is going to have a really, really big upper hand in how the rest of the French internal conflict goes throughout the rest of the game. So if you've got your navy right here, you're going to be able to take them out immediately because they're either going to be stuck in 49 or 50 there. They can't go through your ships without a combat move, which they won't have the opportunity to do. Or if they happen to get the upper hand, and even if you lose northern Algeria here, you can use this British dockyard to try to escape and get out of range before he can attack you. Depending on where your capital is, that's where you're going to be receiving your Lend-Lease, and hopefully you'll be able to get some naval support in time to save your fleet. And I think that the transports are the most important ship you can get because having transports in the French internal conflict is just such a huge boon. More so for the Vichy, I think. If they can get a transport, then that's not a transport that the Germans have to Lend-Lease to them. So that's a huge deal for them. And if you could take out an exposed transport they have that's just sitting there in 49 before they have a chance to get it out of there, that's a big deal. Because the only way Vichy can get units down into mainland Africa is via their recruitment roll, which has terrible odds, or if they get some transports and can get some guys down from southern France, which is where they receive their Lend-Lease. So the Free French really, I think, have an upper hand in the whole internal conflict. And I think leaving your navy right here is a great idea because it either lets you finish that naval fight quickly or get your guys out of there in time and slightly ahead of the Vichy French, so that hopefully you can get them reinforced beforehand. All right, guys, that's all I got for this week. I'll see you next time for Italy. Love you.